On a windswept island off the coast of California, a team of biologists spent a season counting one of the rarest animals on Earth. When they finished, the number they had was almost too small to believe: 15. 15 foxes on an entire island. A species that had ruled these islands for thousands of years was, in the span of a single decade, blinking out of existence. And nobody could explain why. The foxes weren't starving. Their habitat hadn't been bulldozed. No new disease was tearing through them. They were simply disappearing faster than almost any mammal in the history of American wildlife. Something was hunting them into oblivion. And when the biologists finally traced it back to its source, the answer was so strange, so far removed from the fox itself, that it sounded impossible. The thing killing these foxes had been set in motion 40 years earlier by a chemical company dumping poison into the ocean more than 20 miles away, a place most of these foxes' ancestors had never been anywhere near. A pesticide dumped into the sea, decades before the first fox died, and somehow it was reaching out across 40 years and 20 miles of open water to erase a 4-pound animal that had nothing to do with it. Today, against all of it, there are thousands of these foxes again. In 2016, the species pulled off the fastest recovery of any mammal in the entire history of the U.S. Endangered Species Act. A comeback so fast, it became the model conservationists now use around the world. But to understand how they came back, you first have to understand the strangest chain of dominoes in American conservation, and how a poison in the water became a predator in the sky. This is the island fox, and almost everything about it is unlikely. It's the smallest wild dog in North America. A full-grown adult weighs about 4 pounds, smaller than most house cats. You could cradle one in your 2 hands. It exists nowhere else on the planet but California's Channel Islands, a chain of rugged islands off the southern coast. And for thousands of years, this tiny animal was the undisputed king of those islands, the largest land predator in its entire world. That fact shaped everything about it. Because the island fox evolved with no predators of its own, nothing on the islands big enough to hunt it, it never developed the one instinct that keeps most small animals alive: fear. The island fox doesn't hide. It doesn't bolt for cover when a shadow passes overhead. It trots around in the open in broad daylight. It climbs trees to raid bird nests. It has been known to stroll up to a camper, hop into their lap, and steal the food right out of their hands. For thousands of years, that fearlessness cost it nothing. There was nothing to be afraid of. And then in the 1990s, the islands went quiet. On Santa Cruz, the largest island, the fox population had sat at around 2,000 animals for as long as anyone had measured it. In just a few years, it collapsed to fewer than 100. On the neighboring islands of San Miguel and Santa Rosa, the crash was even more total. Each island fell to just 15 surviving foxes. Across the northern islands, more than 90% of the entire population vanished in under a decade. When biologists found the bodies, the cause of death itself wasn't a mystery. The wounds told the story. Talon marks. The foxes were being killed from the air, snatched off the ground by something with claws. They were being hunted. But that only deepened the real mystery, because the thing leaving those wounds was a bird that, for thousands of years, had never set foot on these islands. The islands hadn't changed. The foxes hadn't changed. So why suddenly was a brand new predator falling out of the sky? To answer that, you have to stop looking at the fox and start pulling on a thread that leads all the way back to the mainland. The bird killing the foxes was the golden eagle, a powerful mainland raptor that hunts mammals, and that had never historically lived on the Channel Islands. The question wasn't really what is killing the foxes. It was, why are golden eagles suddenly here at all? To understand that, you have to know which bird used to rule these islands. For thousands of years, the apex bird of the Channel Islands wasn't the golden eagle. It was the bald eagle. And the bald eagle was, strangely, the fox's silent protector, for 2 reasons. First, bald eagles are fish eaters. They pluck their meals out of the ocean and scavenge carcasses on the shore. They have essentially no interest in hunting a small land mammal like a fox. And second, bald eagles are fiercely territorial. They dominated the airspace over these islands and drove off any golden eagle that tried to move in. As long as the bald eagles were there, The foxes were safe, and the golden eagles stayed away. Then the bald eagles vanished. And to understand why, you have to leave the islands entirely and go to a chemical plant on the mainland coast. Starting in the late 1940s, a company manufacturing the pesticide DDT was discharging its waste into the ocean off Los Angeles. At its peak, as much as 640 pounds of DDT every single day flushed into the sewers and out into the sea. That DDT didn't just disappear. It worked its way up the food chain. It built up in the small fish, which were eaten by bigger fish, which were eaten by the bald eagles. And DDT does something specific and devastating to birds of prey. It thins the shells of their eggs. This is the exact catastrophe Rachel Carson made famous in Silent Spring. Eagle eggs so fragile they cracked and collapsed under the weight of the parent trying to incubate them. No eggs survived, no chicks hatched. And so, with no new generation, the bald eagles of the Channel Islands quietly died out. By the 1950s, they were gone entirely, wiped off the islands not by a hunter or a storm, but by a chemical they never touched directly. That was the domino that mattered. With the territorial bald eagles gone, the airspace over the islands stood wide open for the first time in thousands of years. And golden eagles, drifting over from the mainland, found that open door. And they found a reason to stay. Because waiting for them on the islands was an enormous easy food source. Feral pigs. Pigs that ranchers had brought to the islands in the 1800s had escaped, gone wild, and exploded into a population of thousands. Their piglets were perfect prey, and they anchored the golden eagles to the islands, gave them a reason to nest and breed there. And once the golden eagles were established, sustained by all those pigs, they discovered the foxes, a 4-pound animal with no fear, no instinct to hide, trotting around in the open. Easy prey. The eagles didn't need the foxes to survive, the pigs fed them. But the foxes were there for the taking, and the eagles took them relentlessly until 15 were left. Step back and look at the whole chain. A pesticide dumped into the ocean off Los Angeles killed the bald eagles. The dead bald eagles left the sky open. The open sky let in the golden eagles. The feral pigs fed the golden eagles. And the golden eagles ate the foxes. 5 links stretched across 40 years and 20 miles of ocean. And at the very end of it, a tiny fox most people had never heard of was being erased by a poison it had never encountered. Nobody saw it coming because the cause was invisible, indirect, and decades deep. Here's the realization that finally saved the island fox. You cannot save the fox by looking at the fox. The instinct, when a species is dying, is to focus on the species, protect it, fence it, treat it. But the foxes weren't sick and they weren't lacking habitat. They were dying because the invisible web around them had been torn apart. And you cannot fix a torn web by guarding a single strand of it. To save the fox, the rescuers had to repair the entire chain. And they had to do it in exactly the right order, because pulling the wrong domino first would make everything worse. This was the genuinely brilliant part. Think about the trap they were in. The golden eagles were killing the foxes, so the obvious move was to get rid of the golden eagles. But the golden eagles were being fed by the pigs. If you remove the pigs first, you take away the eagle's main food source. And a hungry golden eagle, with the pigs gone, would turn its full attention to the only other meal on the island, the last 15 foxes. Removing the pigs first would have driven the foxes to extinction faster, but removing the eagles first was its own nightmare, because golden eagles are enormous, intelligent, federally protected birds. You can't simply eliminate them, and you can't easily catch them all. It was like defusing a bomb. Cut the wires in the wrong sequence and the whole thing goes off. So a coalition came together to do it right. The National Park Service, the Nature Conservancy, the Institute for Wildlife Studies, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and more than 300 scientists and experts. And instead of just charging in, they did something unusual. They built mathematical models of the entire food web and tested every single move on paper before making it in the real world, to be sure they wouldn't accidentally cinch the knot tighter. Then they executed the plan, carefully and largely all at once. They began capturing the last wild foxes and breeding them in protected pens, a living ark to keep the species from blinking out while the rest of the work was done. They live trapped the golden eagles one by one using net guns and flew them, alive and unharmed, back to the mainland, more than 40 of them, releasing them hundreds of miles away. They launched a massive operation to remove the roughly 5,000 feral pigs that were anchoring the eagles to the islands. And the long term lock on the whole thing, they brought the bald eagles back, releasing young birds year after year so that the island's rightful apex predator would reclaim its territory and keep the golden eagles from ever returning. Each move undid one link in the deadly chain. It was the opposite of a single heroic fix. It was patient, surgical, web wide repair, untangling a knot loop by loop in the one order that wouldn't pull it tighter. And then the same fearlessness that had nearly doomed the foxes became their superpower again. Once the golden eagles were gone, the pigs were gone, and the bald eagles were back on guard overhead, the captive bred foxes were released from their pens into an island that was, once more, free of predators. And the foxes did what they had done for thousands of years before the chain broke. They thrived, out in the open, climbing trees, raiding nests, with nothing left in the sky to fear. The recovery was almost vertical. The 15 foxes left on San Miguel and Santa Rosa multiplied into hundreds. The fewer than 100 on Santa Cruz climbed back toward 2,000. Across the northern islands, the population surged to roughly 4,000 animals. Across the whole chain, more than 5,000. A species that had been given a coin flip's chance of going extinct within a decade had, instead, come roaring back. In August of 2016, just 12 years after the island fox was first listed as endangered, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service announced that 3 of its subspecies had recovered so completely that they could be removed from the endangered species list entirely. It was the fastest successful recovery of any mammal in the history of the Endangered Species Act. 12 years from the brink of oblivion to fully recovered. The 4th subspecies was upgraded from endangered to merely threatened and is still climbing. And the foxes were only part of what came back. With the pigs and the golden eagles gone, the bald eagles are nesting on the Channel Islands again for the first time in half a century. The islands are free of their non-native invaders for the first time in roughly 150 years, and the native plants the pigs had been tearing up are returning. The entire system, rebalanced, began healing itself. And the careful scientific methods invented to save this one tiny fox, the population modeling, the test every move on paper approach, are now being used to guide the recovery of other endangered species, from the California condor to seabirds an ocean away. The island fox was never really the problem, and in the end, it was never really the solution either. The fox was the last visible link in a chain that began with a chemical poured into the ocean, 20 miles away and 40 years before the first fox ever fell from an eagle's talons. We very nearly lost a species that had survived for thousands of years. Not by hunting it, not by paving its home, but by poisoning something it was invisibly connected to, and then failing for years to see the connection at all. That's the lesson buried in this story. In a living system, nothing stands alone. Pull a single thread, even one that seems impossibly far away, and you can unravel something on the other side of the web that you never meant to touch. The foxes died because no one could see the strand that ran from a smokestack to a fish, to an eagle, to a pig, to a fox. And the foxes were saved only when a team of people finally traced that whole web and repaired it, link by link, in exactly the right order. Sometimes saving one small thing means seeing everything it's connected to. The most powerful tool in this entire rescue wasn't a cage or a net or a helicopter. It was the willingness to stop staring at the dying fox and to map the invisible web it had been hanging from the whole time. This is Earth Turn, the engineering behind nature's greatest comebacks. If you haven't seen how a few gophers brought a dead volcano back to life, or how tearing down 4 dams revived an entire river in days, those are both on the channel now. Subscribe and watch the world come back to life.